My father laughed at me in the middle of the boardroom, loud enough that the assistants outside stopped typing. He pointed at the cheap blazer I had pulled off the clearance rack that morning and told the room I looked like I had walked in from a bus station. Then he said the line he had been saving for years, the one I would replay in my head 1,000 times in the months that followed. She can't even afford a real lawyer. What kind of daughter shows up to her own family's hearing with a public defender's leftover paperwork? The men around the long walnut table laughed because he wanted them to. The women laughed because they wanted to keep their jobs. My older brother, sitting at our father's right hand the way he had since he was 19 years old, didn't laugh. He smiled the small, tight smile of a man watching his inheritance get a little safer. I didn't say anything. I gathered my folder, the cheap plastic kind they sell 3 for $1 at the drugstore on Brocken Avenue, and I walked out with my chin level. My heels were scuffed. I had glued the right one back on the night before with the same superglue I used to fix my niece's broken doll the Christmas they let me visit. In the elevator, I looked at my reflection in the brass panel, and I made myself a promise. I had made the same promise to myself the first time my father told me, at 12 years old, that I was the disappointment he had to learn to live with. I had made it again at 22 when he told the wedding planner my mother had hired that they would only be paying for the real daughter's wedding, meaning my younger sister, and I made it once more that morning, riding down 42 floors of glass and steel, the cheap blazer itching at my neck. The promise was simple. One day you will look me in the eye and you will not know me until I tell you to. That day was coming. He just didn't know it yet. I should back up. My name doesn't matter much for the part of the story where my father humiliates me. He had been doing that for 31 years and he had never bothered to use it. He called me the older one when he was being polite and her when he wasn't. My mother, when she remembered, called me by the wrong nickname. The one that had been my cousin's. My younger sister had stopped speaking to me entirely after she got engaged to the son of one of my father's golf partners. She said I made her fiancé uncomfortable because I didn't know how to dress for the family. I had nodded when she said it. I had been nodding at things like that my entire life. What they didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had stopped being the older one a long time ago. I had stopped, in fact, the night I packed 2 suitcases and walked out of the house on Hadley Lane with $800 in a community college acceptance letter folded inside my coat pocket. I was 19. I went to the bus station and I bought a one-way ticket to a city 600 miles away, and I did not call home for 4 years. In those 4 years, I worked. I worked the way people work when they have understood, in their bones, that no one is coming to save them. I worked the overnight shift at a 24-hour diner, where the cook taught me to make eggs 3 different ways and a regular customer named Mr. Bramwell taught me, over endless cups of black coffee, how to read a balance sheet. He had been a controller for a small manufacturing firm before he retired, and he came in every morning at 4:15, because his wife had died and the apartment was too quiet. He saw me studying community college accounting textbooks under the counter, and one Tuesday in November he asked if I wanted to learn it properly. For 3 years Mr. Bramwell sat at the corner booth and taught me everything he knew. Cost accounting, tax structures, how a leveraged buyout actually worked, how private equity firms hid their real returns, how a family-owned company could be carved up like a holiday turkey by a buyer who knew where the joints were. He never charged me a cent. When I tried to pay him, even $5, he would slide it back across the formica and tell me to put it toward my next exam fee. When he died, 3 years after we started, his daughter came in to clear out his usual booth. She handed me a manila envelope. Inside was a check for $62,000 and a note in his shaky handwriting that said, "Buy something they can't take. Buy it quiet. Buy it patient." I cried in the walk-in freezer for 20 minutes, then I cashed the check and I started buying. I won't tell you the whole road from that diner to the woman who walked into my father's boardroom in a cheap blazer. That part is 12 years long and it would bore you. The short version is that I learned. I learned in night school and I learned on weekends. And I learned by working 3 jobs at once and sleeping 4 hours a night for what felt like a decade. I learned how to identify undervalued companies. I learned how to structure deals so quietly that the seller didn't know who was buying until the papers were signed. I learned how to build a holding company with so many layers that you could spend a year peeling them back and still not find me at the center. By the time I was 31, the year my father laughed at me in his boardroom, I owned controlling interests in 14 companies across 4 states. None of them were in my name. The name on the paperwork was a holding entity I had registered through a law firm in Wilmington that did not ask questions and was very, very expensive. The holding entity owned another holding entity, which owned another, and so on, like a set of Russian dolls. At the center of those dolls was a private investment fund I had named after the diner where Mr. Bramwell taught me to read a balance sheet. That fund, 3 months before my father called me into his boardroom, had quietly purchased the entire outstanding debt of my father's company. He didn't know. Not yet. My father's company was called Westridge Holdings, and he had built it from a small construction firm into a regional empire by the time I was a teenager. He owned commercial properties, a logistics arm, 2 mid-sized manufacturing plants, and a controlling stake in a private bank that mostly served other men like him. He had also, in the last 5 years, made a series of very bad decisions. He had over-leveraged the manufacturing arm to fund a vanity development project, a luxury hotel on the coast that ran $60 million over budget. He had taken loans from 3 different regional banks to plug the holes, then taken larger loans to cover the smaller ones. By the spring of last year, Westridge owed just over $140 million to a syndicate of lenders, and the lenders had started to talk to each other. When lenders start talking to each other about a borrower, the borrower is finished. He just doesn't always know it yet. I had been watching for a long time. I had a research firm in Boston that produced weekly briefings on Westridge for me, the way other people get the morning paper. I knew the second the syndicate started looking for an exit. I knew which lender was nervous first, and I went to him quietly through 3 intermediaries, and I made an offer. Then I went to the next one, and the next. Within 4 months, my fund owned all $140 million of my father's debt. Every penny of it, every covenant, every clause, every trigger. He did not know. The reason he called me into his boardroom that morning, the morning he laughed at me, was not because he had finally figured it out. It was because of something far smaller and far uglier. He wanted me to sign a document. The document was a settlement agreement. 3 months earlier, my younger sister had filed a wrongful termination suit against Westridge. She had been working as the head of marketing, a position she was unqualified for, and that my father had created for her after her wedding. She had spent 2 years doing nothing in particular, while drawing a salary of $300,000. Then she had been caught by an internal auditor she could not bully or fire, redirecting roughly $400,000 in vendor payments to a shell company her husband had set up. When the auditor reported it, my brother had moved fast. He had fired her quietly, paid the auditor a settlement to leave, and tried to make the whole thing disappear. It would have, except my sister was furious that anyone in the family had dared to hold her accountable. She filed the wrongful termination suit out of pure spite. Now her lawyers were demanding access to the books. The books contained the vendor fraud. The vendor fraud, if it came out in discovery, would void several of the loan covenanters and trigger an immediate call on $140 million in debt. The debt that I owned. My father, in his panic, had come up with a plan. The plan was me. He had decided in consultation with my brother and the family lawyer that the cleanest solution was to have someone else take the fall for the vendor fraud. Someone with no real position at the company, no documented relationship with the vendors, someone who could be portrayed as an embittered family member who had acted alone out of resentment. Someone, in other words, the family would not miss. That was the document he wanted me to sign that morning. A sworn affidavit stating that I had directed the vendor payments, that I had set up the shell company, that I had acted without my father's or my sister's knowledge. The affidavit came with a settlement. They were offering me $50,000 and the family's willingness to reconcile in exchange for confessing to a federal crime I had not committed. I sat in the boardroom in my cheap blazer, and I let him explain it to me. I let him tell me in front of 7 other men that this was a generous offer, that I should think of it as my contribution to the family's legacy. That $50,000 was probably more money than I had ever seen. That was when he laughed at me. When I asked, very quietly, what would happen if I said no? You won't say no, he said. You can't even afford a real lawyer. What kind of daughter shows up to her own family's hearing with a public defender's leftover paperwork? I walked out. I rode down 42 floors. I made my promise to the brass. Then I went home to the studio apartment I kept in a tired neighborhood because it suited my disguise, and I called my actual lawyer. Her name doesn't matter for this part either, but she had argued in front of the Second Circuit 3 times, and she had cost me $250,000 a year for the last 6 years just to be on retainer. She picked up on the first ring. They want me to sign the affidavit tomorrow morning, I told her. At a deposition, they've scheduled it at the firm on Marbleton Avenue. She was quiet for a moment. Do you want to let them? No. How loud do you want this to be? I thought about the brass panel in the elevator. I thought about my mother calling me by my cousin's name at my own college graduation. I thought about the wedding planner. I thought about Mr. Bramwell in the corner booth, sliding my $5 bill back across the Formica. I want it loud, I said. I want it on the record. I want him to see me coming and not understand what he's looking at until it's too late. Then wear the blazer, she said. Wear exactly what you wore today. Let him think nothing has changed. The deposition was scheduled for 9 in the morning at the offices of Marlowe and Stein, the firm that had handled my father's legal work for 25 years. It was on the 38th floor of a building 2 blocks from his own. I arrived 10 minutes early in the same cheap blazer, the same glued heel, my hair pulled back in the plain ponytail I had been wearing since college. I had a folder under my arm. The folder this time was not from the drugstore. It was leather hand-stitched, the kind of folder a person carries when they have nothing to prove and everything to deliver. I had bought it 3 years earlier from a leatherworker in Florence on a trip I had never told my family about. It was the only luxury I allowed myself in their presence, and I knew none of them would notice. My father was already there. So was my brother. So was the family lawyer, a man in his 60s, who had golfed with my father every Saturday for 2 decades, and who had, I happened to know, signed off on the original loan structure that was about to collapse. My sister had not come. She was apparently too distraught. A court reporter was set up at the head of the conference table. A videographer was setting up beside her, because my father's lawyer had insisted in his initial filings that the deposition be recorded for the historical record of the family's reconciliation. I had agreed in writing through my lawyer. He had thought this was a sign of weakness. My father stood when I came in, not out of respect. He stood the way a man stands when he wants to physically loom over the room. He waved a hand at the chair across from him. Sit down. Let's get this over with so you can go back to whatever it is you do. I sat down. I set the leather folder on the table. I did not open it. The family lawyer cleared his throat. We'll begin by establishing the parties present and confirming that you have read and reviewed the affidavit prepared for your signature. He slid a thick document across the table. Take a moment to review it, and then we'll proceed. I did not look at the document. I looked at my father. Before we begin, I said, I'd like my counsel to enter the room. My father snorted. Your counsel? You brought your own lawyer? With what? Food stamps? The door opened. My lawyer walked in. She was in a charcoal suit that cost more than my father's car. Behind her walked a second attorney, a senior partner from a New York firm whose name I will not give you here, but which my father absolutely recognized, because his own counsel had tried and failed to hire that firm 3 years earlier when Westridge was looking to expand. Behind that man walked a third attorney, and behind her a forensic accountant carrying 2 banker's boxes. My father's lawyer stood up so fast his chair tipped backward. What is this? He said. My lawyer set her own folder on the table. We are appearing on behalf of the witness. We have several preliminary matters before any sworn testimony is taken. She turned to the court reporter. Please note for the record that the witness, prior to executing any affidavit, wishes to disclose certain material facts relevant to the matter at hand. including, but not limited to, the identity of the holder of the outstanding senior debt of Westridge Holdings. The room went very quiet. My father's lawyer sat down again slowly. He looked at my father. My father was not looking at him. My father was looking at me. For the first time in 31 years, my father was actually looking at me. He had not, I realized, ever really looked at me before. He had looked through me, around me, past me. Now he was looking at me, and his face was doing something I had never seen it do, which was registering that he did not know what he was looking at. I opened my leather folder. 3 months ago, I said, an investment fund acquired the entirety of Westridge Holdings' outstanding senior debt from the syndicate of lenders. The acquisition was structured through a holding company registered in Delaware. That holding company is wholly owned by a parent entity, which is in turn wholly owned by a private fund. I slid the first document across the table. It was the assignment of the senior loan. It had been executed on December 11th. The fund is named Bramwell Capital. My father's lawyer reached for the document. His hand was shaking slightly. He read it. He read it again. He looked up at my father. Bramwell Capital is the senior lender, he said. His voice was the voice of a man who had just understood that he was about to lose his license. All $140 million is owed to a single entity, and the covenanters. He paused. The covenanters include a change of control clause. If any material misrepresentation is identified in the company's financial statements, the entire balance becomes callable in 30 days. Yes, I said. My father had not moved. He had not blinked. There is also, I continued, a provision regarding the prosecution of fraud against the company by any party seeking to settle a civil matter involving the company. If such fraud is admitted, in a sworn deposition, for example, the senior lender has standing to bring its own action and to seize all collateral securing the loan, which, as you are aware, includes the manufacturing arm, the logistics arm, the commercial properties on Cedar Bridge and Fifth, the coastal hotel project, and my father's personal residence on Hadley Lane, which he personally pledged as additional security in the second restructuring. I looked at my father. He was very pale. If I had signed the affidavit you brought me today, I said, and admitted to the vendor fraud, the senior lender would have been within its rights to call the full balance the same afternoon. You would have lost everything by Friday. My lawyer placed a second document on the table, then a third, then a fourth. The forensic accountant opened the first banker's box and began removing files. We will not be signing the affidavit, my lawyer said. Instead, we are filing the following, a notice of default on the senior loan, based on the misrepresentations in the most recent quarterly financial statement, which we have evidence were materially false. A motion to intervene in the wrongful termination action on behalf of the senior lender, and a criminal referral to the United States Attorney's Office for the Southern District regarding the vendor fraud, which we have spent the last 90 days documenting in considerable detail. The forensic accountant set down a thick binder. The binder was labeled Vendor Payment Irregularities, Westridge and Holdings, Q1, TUR their Q4. It was 3 inches thick. My father's lawyer made a sound that was not quite a word. My father finally spoke. His voice was hoarse. Who are you? I looked at him. I let the silence stretch. I am the older one, I said. I have been the older one for 31 years. You just never bothered to find out what that meant. My brother stood up. He was trying for outrage and managing only panic. This is ridiculous. This is some kind of fraud. You can't possibly. You don't have the money to. I reached into my folder. I removed a single sheet of paper. It was a list. The list contained 14 company names, each with a corresponding ownership percentage, each held through Bramwell Capital. The combined value, as appraised the previous quarter, was just under $900 million. I slid it across the table. My brother looked at it. He sat down. He did not stand up again for the rest of the meeting. The videographer was still recording. The court reporter was typing as fast as she could. My father's lawyer was making small motions with his hands that I think were meant to stop the recording, but that he had forgotten how to actually execute. I closed my folder. Here is what is going to happen, I said. You will not be calling me to any further hearings. You will not be requesting any further signatures. The wrongful termination suit will be settled by the end of the week, at terms set by my counsel, and the settlement will include a full admission of the vendor fraud by the actual responsible parties, who are sitting at this table. The senior loan will be restructured under terms I will personally dictate. My father will resign as CEO of Westridge Holdings by the close of business tomorrow. My brother will resign as CFO. Both will be barred from any operational role going forward. The board, which I will be reconstituting, will appoint an interim management team selected by Bramwell Capital. My father had not moved. You will keep the house on Hadley Lane, I said, because my mother is still living in it, and she is not a party to this. You will keep your personal car. You will keep enough to live on. You will not keep the company. You will not keep the hotel. You will not keep the bank. I stood up. I learned to read a balance sheet at a diner counter, I said. A man named Mr. Bramwell taught me over 3 years, for free, because no one in my family ever taught me anything. He left me $62,000 when he died. I built every single thing I own from that $62,000. While you were laughing at my blazer, I was buying your company. I bought it the way he told me to. Quiet, patient, so that one day you would look at me, and you would not know me until I told you who I was. I put on my coat, the cheap one. The one with the loose button on the left cuff that I had been meaning to fix for 2 years. I am telling you now, I said. I walked out of the conference room. I rode down 38 floors. I did not look at the brass panel. I did not need to anymore. A week later, my father's resignation letter was on my desk. He had asked, through 3 intermediaries, whether he could see me. I said no, not yet. Perhaps not ever. My brother sent a letter through his lawyer asking for a settlement that would let him keep his house. I forwarded the letter to the U.S. Attorney's Office with a note. The U.S. Attorney's Office found my note very helpful. My sister called me. She had not called me in 4 years. She cried for the first 6 minutes. She told me she had always loved me. She told me she had always known I was special. She asked, eventually, if there was any way I could find it in my heart to help her with the legal fees for the criminal investigation that was now opening against her and her husband. I let her finish. Then I said, very politely, I don't believe we've actually met. I'm the older one. I hung up. My mother came to see me last month. She came alone, on the train, with a small overnight bag. She had aged 10 years in 6 months. She did not ask for anything. She sat in my living room, which is in a building she has never seen before, in a neighborhood she did not know existed, and she looked around for a long time without speaking. Then she said, I am sorry. I should have known you. I should have looked at you. I should have called you by your name. I did not say it was all right, because it wasn't. But I made her tea. I let her stay the night. In the morning, she went home and I went to work, and the city outside my window was a city I had built quietly, patiently, in the years when nobody in that house had bothered to know I was alive. Mr. Bramwell, I think about you every morning at 4:15. I bought something they couldn't take. I bought it the way you told me to. It was mine the whole time. I used to think the worst thing about being unseen by your own family was the loneliness. I was wrong. The worst thing was how it tricked me, for years, into believing the smallness they assigned me was the actual size of my life. I walked around in a body they had labeled the disappointment, and for a long time I let that label do my breathing for me. What I learned, slowly, at a diner counter at 4 in the morning, is that nobody owes you the truth about who you are. Not your father, not your mother, not the sister who stopped calling. You have to find that truth yourself, in the quiet, when nobody is watching, when there is no audience and no applause and no one to confirm that the work matters. Mr. Bramwell never once told me I was special. He told me my balance sheet was wrong on line 17. He told me to check my math. He told me to come back tomorrow and try again. That is what real care looks like. It is unglamorous and it is patient and it does not announce itself. The cause of everything that happened to my father was not me. I want to be honest about that. He did not lose his company because I was angry. He lost it because he made bad decisions for 15 years, then made worse decisions to cover up the bad ones. then asked his daughter to lie under oath to cover up the worse ones. I was the river he eventually fell into, but I did not push him. He had been walking toward that water his whole life. That is the law of cause and effect. You plant contempt, you grow contempt. You plant fraud, you grow consequences. There is no special exemption for fathers. What I planted instead was $62,000 and 12 years of study. I planted it quietly. I did not announce it on holidays or at weddings or in arguments. I planted it in the dark soil of unglamorous mornings, of textbooks read between shifts, of 1,000 small refusals to quit. Anyone reading this who feels invisible right now, who has been told they are the lesser sibling, the wrong child, the embarrassment, please hear me. Your dignity does not require their permission. Your mind does not require their approval. Your strength does not require their witness. Build the thing. Build it quiet. Build it patient. Build it for yourself. Because building yourself is the only honest revenge there is. I am not proud of every moment in that boardroom. I had imagined it for years, and the real version was both more and less than I had pictured. What I am proud of is the woman who got there. The years of her, the 4 a.m. shifts of her, the freezer cry of her, the cheap blazer of her. She did the work when no one was watching. She is the only reason I am here. If you carry quiet inside you, do not waste it. Quiet is where you become someone they cannot take from you.